Hey guys, welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're new. So something I have been wanting to do for quite a while now is make a massive art journal. Something that is big enough that there's a page for every day of the year. I have had videos on this channel in the past about making art journals or junk journals, but I would say in terms of the number of pages that are actually in this book, this might be the largest that I have ever created. This particular journal consists of 368 pages, which broke down to 92 individual sheets of paper. So per sheet of paper, you get 4 pages. Now this was a great addition to my scrap drawer project series, since I was able to clean out large amounts of scraps in one go. Now, for those of you who have been around for the scrap drawer project in the past, you will know that I started this project because I ended up putting all of my scraps and random papers in one drawer. However, at this point, the drawer has kind of had a bit of overflow, and the bin that you see me sorting through in this video also consists of scraps. Now, in my defense, the main reason that there are this many quote-unquote scraps is that some of these pieces of paper are not necessarily scraps as much as they are off-prints, things that didn't go right when I tried printing them the first time. It might be die cuts that were just off enough that I didn't want to sell them, but I felt like they were still usable enough for me. It might be entire sheets of book paper that I have left over from tearing apart something. Not everything in here is actually small pieces. Some of them are rather large amounts of kind of bigger sheets, so they just end up taking a lot of space. However, enough defending myself, this bin also consists of a bunch of random scraps. So I thought that creating a book this massive would be a good way to just get rid of a good handful of them in one go. And so the first step of this journal making process was to sort through these papers and pull out a bunch that I wanted to use as pages. These varied from blank pages, painted papers, magazine pages, book pages, packaging, envelopes, printouts, wrapping paper. Literally whatever I could find that I could fold in half to make a page was an option to put in this journal. If it looked interesting and like it would make a good base for an art journal page, I set it aside. I also selected a variety of different sizes. Some of them were full 8.5 by 11 inch sheets of paper, and some were much smaller. I do like to vary the size of my pages a little bit in my art journals because I feel like it just keeps things interesting, and so I knew I wanted to do that with this journal. Next up in this process was to just start cutting down the random pages that I had set aside. I actually had an old book whose covers I had been saving for the perfect project. I bought this book at a thrift store, and I thought that the covers were gorgeous, and so I cut them free of their original book. I actually lost the spine of it a long time ago because there was quite a bit of water damage in the original book, and I then measured them and did some quick math on what side my pages should be maximum. Because although I don't mind some variance in the sizes of my pages, I still wanted to make sure that the pages were small enough that they were confined within the book once it was finished. And then I just started trimming down my papers and folding them in half. I did this to all of the papers that I set aside. Some of them were smaller and didn't need trimming, and if that was the case, I just folded them in half and put them with the rest of my trimmed papers. After all of my papers were trimmed and folded, the next step was to make them into signatures. Now, for those of you who are new to bookmaking and don't know what a signature is, essentially it's just when you put pages inside of each other so that you have a group of pages in one little booklet. For this particular journal, I decided that I wanted 6 signatures, and with some more quick math, I worked out that it would need to be approximately 15 sheets per signature, with 2 of them having 1 extra page. Then, when I got into actually making the signatures, the first thing I did was I selected 6 pieces that were a bit larger and a bit thicker that I wanted to act as the covers of my signatures. This is kind of unnecessary. You don't necessarily need to have thicker pages, but for me, I just feel a little more comfortable with my bookbinding if my signatures have something sturdy on the outside of them. And once I had those selected, I got to assembling. I ended up doing this in a pretty methodic way, where I would place 1 page inside of each signature and then mark a tally off on a little post-it note so I could keep track of how many pages were already in which signatures. And when I placed my pages inside of my signatures, I did kind of take care to make them more aesthetically appealing. You don't have to do this, but personally, I like when the pages inside of my book all look nice as a cohesive whole. Sometimes certain pages paired with other pages can give them a completely different vibe, and I like experimenting with that sort of assemblage idea when I am making books. Now, once my signatures were done, it was time to actually start the binding process. I like to use embroidery floss for my binding, and I used a Coptic stitch for this particular book. I had never done this particular type of binding with signatures. I've only ever done it with single pages before, but I figured that it would work, and it absolutely does. I also added some masking tape to the raw edges of my covers before I punched holes in them, just so I could have that finished edge instead of the raw cut line from where I removed it from my book. And since this is not actually a binding tutorial, I will just link to a Patreon post in the description of this video where I showed how to do the Coptic stitch, but once the stitching was done, I just added a few finishing touches before I was ready to call the book complete. The first finishing touch that I added was that I left a length of floss on the end of one of my tails, and I strung some beads onto there. I used some small paper homemade ones, as well as some gold seed beads, just to give it a sort of interesting dangle effect. I then glued some lace to the edge of the cover, just to give it an additional little bit of interest on the front. I also glued a printable book plate on the inside cover. I wrapped it in twine to keep it closed, and that was it. So all in all, I really had a ton of fun making this journal. Like I said, I think it might be one of the biggest, if not the biggest journal I've ever made. And I'm super excited to get started using it come January. Because it is so large and I specifically made it with at least 365 pages, I figure it will be perfect for a daily project in the new year. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to be sharing pages from that journal, whether it be on my Patreon page or on my Instagram or even here on YouTube, but I'm sure that it will not be the last you see of this journal. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this journal making process. Again, I had a ton of fun making it. Thank you all so much for watching. You can subscribe if you want to see more videos like this or very different from this in the future. And until next time, happy creating!